I never thought Thanksgiving would break me. That night, the table sparkled with laughter, golden turkey, and the illusion of family harmony. But beneath every compliment tossed toward my brother, I felt myself shrinking, invisible again. Then, my 7-year-old niece, Lily, shattered the silence with a question no one dared to ask. "Why do you never praise Aunt Emma?" The room froze. My parents smiled, pretending, but I caught the flicker of panic in their eyes. In that instant, I knew something ugly was about to surface, something we had all been trained to bury. And Lily had just dug it up. The dining room gleamed as if it had been staged for a glossy magazine spread. Candles flickered against polished silverware, and the turkey in the center of the table looked too perfect to be real. My mother's laughter rang out, high and deliberate, every note directed at my brother, Thomas, as he recounted another story of his successes at work. His voice carried effortlessly, filling the room, while mine dissolved into the background like steam. I smiled when spoken to, nodded at the right times, and tucked away the sting of invisibility as I had learned to do since childhood. Lily sat beside me, her small legs swinging restlessly under the chair. She was 7, too young to notice the fault lines in a family that worked so hard to pretend, or so I thought. Her eyes darted across the table, sharp and curious, lingering on the way my parents leaned toward Thomas, on the way every toast and laugh seemed to orbit him. She tugged at my sleeve, whispering, "Why don't they talk about you?" Her innocence cut deeper than any insult. I pressed her hand and whispered back, "It's fine, sweetie. Let's just eat." But even as I said it, I felt the lie burn my throat. Dinner went on with its predictable rhythm. My mother brought up Thomas's new promotion. My father added a story about how proud he was when Thomas had bought his first house. The spotlight never shifted. I sipped my wine, pretending to be part of the laughter, though each word was a blade carving out my absence. Lily's eyes never left me. She was watching, absorbing, questioning in a way that made me uneasy. Children weren't supposed to notice such things, but she did. When dessert arrived, pumpkin pie crowned with whipped cream, Lily spoke again, this time louder. Her voice rang across the table. "Why do you never praise Aunt Emma?" The fork in my hand froze. A silence fell so heavy it could crush bones. My parents exchanged glances, that brittle smile plastered on their faces. My mother chuckled awkwardly. "Of course we do, Lily. We love your aunt very much." My father nodded in agreement. "Yes, Emma is just as special as anyone here." The words were smooth, rehearsed, but their eyes betrayed them. I had seen that look 1,000 times. Dismissal wrapped in affection. A performance for the sake of appearances. I felt my chest tighten. For a moment I was no longer 34 years old, but a child again, standing at the piano after a recital, hearing Thomas showered with applause while my own clumsy song was brushed aside with a polite smile. I remembered science fairs where my projects were labeled cute while his were brilliant, family gatherings where I was the shadow and he was the sun. Gaslighting had been their favorite weapon. "Emma, don't be silly, we treat you both the same." And somehow I had always been made to feel guilty for even noticing. Now Lily had noticed. And she had asked the one question no one dared to ask. The air seemed charged. The kind of tension that hums just before lightning splits the sky. My brother cleared his throat, pretending to laugh, as if a child's curiosity was nothing more than an amusing quirk, but his hand tightened on his glass, knuckles white. My mother shifted in her chair, rearranging napkins that didn't need straightening. My father cut into his pie, though he had no intention of eating it. All of them scrambling, desperate to regain the illusion. I wanted to tell Lily to let it go, to change the subject, but the words stuck. I realized how badly I wanted the truth spoken aloud, even if it came from a child's mouth. My niece was braver than I had ever been at her age. Then something strange happened. Lily hopped off her chair, her shoes clattering against the hardwood floor as she rushed to grab more napkins. She ran past the mantel where an old wooden box sat, a family heirloom no one was allowed to touch. As she brushed by, the box shifted, rattling softly as if disturbed by her presence. My eyes locked on it. It was the same box I had seen all my life, carved with intricate patterns, its lid always closed. My parents claimed it contained old letters, nothing important. Yet the way my mother's head snapped toward it, the way my father stiffened as if guarding a secret, told me otherwise. Lily returned with her napkins, oblivious to what had just happened, but my gaze lingered on that box. It hadn't moved in years. Why tonight? Why when Lily dared to speak what I had buried for decades? The room filled again with forced conversation, but I barely heard it. My heart pounded in my ears, my mind racing with questions I didn't want to answer. For the first time in years, I felt that the cracks in our golden cage might finally give way, and I couldn't decide if I was terrified or relieved. The conversation limped back into motion, though it felt like watching actors stumble through a script they no longer believed. My parents tried to shift focus, asking Thomas about his latest business deal, and soon the table was full of admiration again. Every laugh, every nod, every approving glance circled around him as if he were the sun holding us in orbit. I opened my mouth to add something, anything, but my father cut across me before I could finish the first sentence. "Thomas, tell them about the new project you're leading," he said, as if I weren't even in the room. I felt the old familiar heat rise in my chest. I remembered being 12, raising my hand to answer in school while my father shook his head and said, "Let Thomas handle it." I remembered Christmas mornings where Thomas's presents towered in bright wrapping paper, while mine were practical, dull, and unceremoniously shoved across the floor. My mistakes were magnified. Forgotten homework became proof I was careless. A spilled drink proof I was clumsy. Thomas's blunders, meanwhile, were laughed off. "Boys will be boys," they said. Emma should know better. Lily was watching. At first, her face was open, bright with the innocence of a child enjoying pie and laughter. But as the evening unfolded, her expression hardened. She saw the way my father leaned forward when Thomas spoke, the way my mother interrupted me to return the spotlight to her son. She saw me shrink back in silence, and she didn't understand why no one else noticed. Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment she looked older than 7, as if she were calculating something beyond her years. "Emma, do you remember when—" I started, but my mother's sharp voice cut me off. "Thomas, wasn't that the year you went to New York? Tell them that story." I stopped, my words strangled before they reached the air. The laughter roared back, swallowing the space where my voice had been. I looked at Lily. She bit her lip, frowning. She knew. She was piecing it together, and the weight of her gaze made me ache. My mind slipped back to the years I had tried so hard to rationalize. I remembered a science fair when I was 10, building a small motor from scraps I had begged for weeks to collect. My teacher praised my project, but when my parents arrived, their eyes went straight to Thomas's glossy store-bought volcano. "Look at that brilliance," my father said, clapping him on the back. "Emma's little motor is nice too," my mother added absently, already ushering us toward the judges. The sting of being invisible had followed me into adulthood, and now here I was again, muted at my own family's table. The sound of a chair scraping pulled me back. Lily was reaching across the table for the gravy boat, her small fingers stretching too far. "Careful," I whispered, but it was too late. The boat tipped, thick sauce cascading across the linen tablecloth, dripping onto the floor in slow brown streams. "Lily!" My mother's voice cracked like a whip. My father slammed his hand on the table. "What is wrong with you, child? Look what you've done!" The room erupted with scolding. Thomas muttered, "Kids these days." Shaking his head as though the world had betrayed him, I reached for napkins, trying to help, but the chaos drowned me out. Lily stood frozen, her little hands clenched at her sides, her face red not from guilt, but fury. Then she screamed. Her voice was sharp enough to slice through the noise. "Stop yelling at me! Aunt Emma isn't the one who's wrong. You are! You always make her sad." The words struck like a stone against glass, shattering the illusion we had all been trained to protect. The room went silent, the the kind of silence that hums in your ears and makes your pulse thunder. I stared at her, stunned. My 7-year-old niece had said what I had buried for decades. Her small chest rose and fell with the force of her declaration, her eyes wet but blazing. She wasn't just defending herself. She was defending me. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. My father blinked, stunned. Even Thomas, who always seemed to know how to perform in these moments, sat dumbstruck. They all turned slowly in unison, and their eyes landed on me. I could feel the shift. To them, Lily's words weren't just childish outbursts. They were a threat. And in that instant, I was no longer the forgotten daughter, the quiet sister. I was the accused, the instigator, the one they would blame for the truth being spoken aloud. Their stares pressed into me, hard and accusing, as though I had planted the rebellion inside Lily's head. And for a fleeting, terrifying moment, I wondered if they were right. Had my silence, my pain, my invisible suffering seeped into her bones without me realizing? Or had she simply seen what no one else dared to? The tension was unbearable, a storm waiting to break, and I knew that this night, this single dinner, would never again let us return to the safety of lies. The silence that followed Lily's outburst was the kind that made the walls seem to lean in, suffocating. My father's jaw tightened, his face mottled with a rage I hadn't seen in years. He slammed his fist against the table so hard the silverware rattled. "Enough!" His voice cracked like thunder. His eyes blazed as they turned to Lily. "You?" he spat, pointing a trembling finger at her. "You're just like your mother, a troublemaker, a destroyer." Time stopped. His words hung in the air, sour and heavy, until they settled deep into my bones. My breath caught, my skin cold. The table, the food, the candles, all of it blurred into the background. "Her mother?" I whispered, but my voice was drowned out by the pounding in my ears. My father realized too late what he had let slip, but the damage was done. My sister-in-law, Lily's mother, had always been spoken of in vague, sanitized tones. She had died young, a tragic accident everyone avoided discussing. Now, in that single unguarded moment, my father's fury tore open the story we had never been allowed to know. She hadn't simply been unlucky, she had been destroyed by them, by this same toxic orbit that had crushed me all my life. I stared at Lily, her wide eyes brimming with confusion, her small body trembling. She didn't understand the full weight of what had been revealed, but I did. And in that instant, the memories of my own pain fused with the unspoken truth of hers. My suffering wasn't an isolated mistake. It was part of a cycle, a generational curse disguised as tradition. The realization knocked the air out of me. All those years I believed I was the problem, too sensitive, too weak, too needy, were lies. My family's cruelty wasn't a flaw in me. It was the pattern they had perfected. My sister-in-law had been caught in the same web, and she hadn't survived. My mother gasped, quickly regaining composure. "John!" she hissed at my father. "Enough! You're upsetting the children." But her eyes darted toward me, sharp with warning, as though I were the threat, not him. Thomas broke his silence with a low, furious growl. "This is your fault, Emma. You've poisoned her mind." His words struck like lashes. "You've been whispering into Lily's ear, filling her head with garbage about us. Admit it." The chorus rose. My mother chimed in, her voice trembling but calculated. "Why else would a child say such things? Emma, how dare you drag an innocent girl into your bitterness?" I opened my mouth to defend myself, but no sound came. I was drowning. Their accusations closed in, voices layering over each other until I could barely distinguish one from the next. Liar, manipulator, troublemaker. And in that torrent of blame, a thought slipped into my mind, dark and familiar. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am the poison. The room seemed to tilt. I could see Lily clinging to the edge of her chair, her small hands gripping the wood until her knuckles whitened. Tears streaked her cheeks. "Stop it!" she cried, her voice trembling. "She didn't do anything! Leave her alone!" But they didn't hear her, or refused to. They only saw me, the scapegoat, the vessel for all their rage, all their shame. A hollowness spread through my chest. I wanted to run, to disappear into the night and never return, to finally surrender to the certainty that I was, and always would be, the problem. My chair scraped back against the floor as I stood. My legs felt like lead, but they carried me toward the door. The house was closing in on me, the walls echoing with every cruel word I had ever heard. "Don't leave me." Lily's voice cracked, desperate. I froze. She was beside me in an instant, her tiny fingers gripping mine with surprising force. Her eyes, still wet with tears, locked onto mine, fierce and unyielding. In those eyes, I didn't see confusion or fear. I saw defiance, strength, a reflection of what I could be if I chose not to surrender. The room was still buzzing with accusations, but their voices dimmed as I focused on her. She believed in me when I no longer believed in myself. She was a child, and yet she carried the courage I had been too afraid to claim. I sank back down into my chair, Lily's hand still clutching mine. My family saw weakness, but I felt something shift deep inside me, a spark refusing to die. The darkness had pulled me under, but that small, stubborn grip reminded me, this wasn't the end. The cage was cracking, and once it shattered, there would be no going back. The weight of their accusations lingered long after the voices faded, but Lily's small hand in mine burned like a spark against the cold. I stared at her, trembling but unbroken, and for the first time I understood. It wasn't me. It had never been me. The flaw wasn't inside of me. It was in them, in this system that demanded sacrifice to preserve its illusion of perfection. My father's rage, my mother's manipulation, Thomas's complicity, none of it defined me. It was the machinery of a family that devoured its own to keep its lies intact. The truth seared through me, painful and liberating. My chest tightened, not with shame this time, but with rage. Rage at the years stolen, the lies fed to me, the gaslighting that carved me into silence. Rage that my sister-in-law, Lily's mother, had been consumed by the same cruelty, and that Lily was already being pulled into its orbit. No more. The thought surged through me like fire, transforming the hollow despair into something sharper, stronger. I would not let Lily grow up believing she was the problem. I would not let history repeat itself. If they wanted me to play the scapegoat, they had chosen the wrong victim. I squeezed Lily's hand and whispered, "It's not your fault." Her tears slowed, confusion flickering across her face, but I saw relief there too. She wasn't alone, and neither was I. As the table conversation limped forward, trying to patch over the explosion, I sat in silence, but inside me a storm gathered. My family thought they had silenced me again. They were wrong. For the first time, I was watching them, not with guilt, but with clarity. Every slip, every contradiction, every word they spoke was a crack in their facade. And I would remember it all. The days that followed were heavy with tension. My parents avoided the subject of Thanksgiving, but I saw their unease in the way they guarded conversations, lowering their voices when I entered the room. Thomas kept his distance, his eyes cold, but there was fear in them too. They knew something had shifted. They had lost their grip. I began to dig. Late at night, after Lily fell asleep on the couch with her stuffed rabbit, I searched the house. My heart pounded with each creak of the floorboards, terrified of being caught, but I pushed forward. In the attic, I found boxes of old photo albums, letters, documents that didn't match the stories I'd been told. Buried under yellowed papers, I discovered a thin notebook, the handwriting instantly recognizable. It was hers, Lily's mother, my sister-in-law. The entries were brief but raw. Notes about cruel remarks, subtle humiliations, the same pattern I knew too well. One line stopped me cold. They need someone to blame, and they've chosen me. If I resist, they turn to Emma. They switch us like interchangeable shields. My breath caught. She had known. She had seen the system clearly, and still it had consumed her. I clutched the notebook to my chest, trembling, both devastated and vindicated. It wasn't just my story. It was a legacy of abuse passed from one woman to another. And if I didn't break it, it would become Lily's story too. I thought of the wooden box on the mantel. Its sudden shift during dinner, my parents' panicked glances. I knew then that it held more than heirlooms. My hands shook as I lifted it one evening while the house was quiet. The lid creaked open to reveal a stack of letters bound with fraying ribbon. I sat on the floor, reading in the glow of a single lamp. Letters written by my sister-in-law, never sent, filled with pleas, accusations, and finally despair. Words like, "They make me question my own reality," and "If I vanish, promise me someone will see through them." Tears blurred my vision. She hadn't been weak. She hadn't simply fallen apart. She had been systematically destroyed by the same cycle that had shaped me. And those letters were her attempt to leave behind a map, breadcrumbs to truth. I closed the box with shaking hands. The evidence was undeniable. My parents' cruelty was no longer just memory. It was documented, written in her desperate scrawl. They couldn't erase it, not anymore. As I tucked the box beneath my bed, a thought gnawed at me. If I revealed this truth, if I tore down the facade, I would destroy the family as everyone else knew it. Cousins, neighbors, friends, people who admired the perfect household would see only ashes, and maybe, just maybe, they would blame me for lighting the match. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, Lily's steady breathing beside me. The question echoed in my mind. If I fight back, I can save her. But what will it cost me? Will I lose everything? The fragments of family I still have? The fragile acceptance I once craved? Morning came with its pale light, and I made my choice. I would not stay silent. I had carried their poison long enough. If the truth burned down the illusion, then so be it. From those ashes, Lily and I could rise free. The air in the dining room was thick with expectation, every breath heavy with the weight of what had not yet been spoken. My parents sat at the head of the table, perfectly composed, pretending nothing had shifted since Thanksgiving. Cousins and uncles had gathered for another holiday dinner. Laughter forced, glasses clinking, the performance intact. But beneath it all, I could feel the cracks spreading. Tonight I decided I would not leave with silence lodged in my throat. I stood, my hands trembling as I set the wooden box on the table. Conversations faltered. My mother's smile froze, her hand still clutching a fork halfway to her lips. My father's eyes narrowed, already calculating, already ready to disarm me with ridicule. "This," I said, my voice trembling but loud enough to cut through the hum of chatter, "is the truth you've all been denied." I untied the ribbon and pulled free the first letter. My sister-in-law's handwriting spilled across the page in desperate strokes. I read aloud. "They make me question my reality. They twist every kindness into weakness. They praise one child while destroying another. If I vanish, please don't let them erase me." Gasps rippled around the table. My mother slammed her hand against the wood. "Enough! Those are private, lies written by a troubled woman." But I didn't stop. One by one, I read the letters, each one a piece of evidence carved out of her suffering. Her words echoed mine, each line confirming what I had lived, the scapegoating, the favoritism, the relentless gaslighting. I added my own testimony, voice shaking but unbroken. All my life, I was told I was the problem, that I was ungrateful, dramatic, too sensitive. But it wasn't me. It was them. It's always been them. Whispers spread like wildfire. My cousins shifted uneasily, glancing at one another. Some looked at me with pity, others with dawning recognition. The illusion was unraveling, thread by thread. I turned to Thomas, bracing myself for his rebuttal, for the loyal son's defense of our parents. But instead of fury, I saw something else in his eyes, something I hadn't expected. His gaze dropped to the table, shoulders sagging as if the weight of years had finally broken him. He didn't speak. He didn't deny. He simply lowered his head in silence. The effect was electric. My father opened his mouth to demand his loyalty, but the absence of it was louder than any accusation I could have spoken. For the first time, Thomas wasn't standing on their side. He wasn't standing at all. A chill swept through me. I had always believed Thomas thrived in their favoritism, but now I saw it differently. He too had been molded, puffed up, paraded, weaponized against me. His silence was an admission. He hadn't escaped unscathed. The realization struck with a force that left me trembling. The true architects of this cage weren't my brother, not even the family at large. It was them, my parents. The center of the web, spinning lies, feeding poison, feeding on us all. "Look at her," my mother hissed, her face contorted. "She's twisting everything to make us the villains." "Because you are!" The words tore from me, raw and unfiltered. "You raised us in a house built on lies. You chose a favorite and turned the rest into pawns. You destroyed your daughter-in-law, you nearly destroyed me, and now you want to do the same to Lily." My father stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. "We have done nothing but love this family." His roar filled the room, but it no longer held the power it once did. People were watching now, not with blind admiration, but with suspicion, with doubt. The image was crumbling. My mother reached for Thomas, but he pulled his arm away. The gesture was small, but it was the final crack in the mask. Their reign was ending. The room spiraled into chaos, shouts, protests, desperate explanations. But the tide had shifted. The scapegoat was no longer silent. The golden child was no longer defending them. Their weapons, denial, gaslighting, intimidation, were powerless against the weight of truth. I felt Lily's hand slip into mine. Her eyes, wide but steady, looked up at me with something I had never expected to see: pride. "I'm proud of you, Aunt Emma," she whispered, her voice trembling but sure. "You didn't let them win." And for the first time, I understood what victory meant. Not vengeance. Not the satisfaction of watching them crumble. Victory was standing here, holding the hand of a child who would grow up free of their poison. The house shook with their rage, but it no longer mattered. They could scream, they could deny, they could claw at the walls of the cage they had built. But the scapegoat was gone. The cycle was broken. The war was not about destroying them, it was about saving us. And in that moment, I realized I had already won. The aftermath was not a single explosion, but a slow, inevitable collapse. In the weeks after that dinner, the family fractured like glass dropped on stone. My parents clung to their version of the story, insisting I had manipulated everyone, that the letters were forgeries, that grief had twisted me into a liar. But their fury no longer carried the same weight. Every time they raised their voices, their desperation became more obvious, their control slipping further from their hands. Some relatives distanced themselves quietly, choosing silence rather than confrontation, but a few, cousins who had seen the cracks long before I spoke, reached out. One called me late at night, whispering, "I always knew something was wrong. I just didn't have the courage to say it." Another sent a message, "I believe you. I'm sorry I stayed quiet for so long." Their words were small but powerful, seeds of validation I had never received from my own parents. For the first time, I realized the truth had allies. Thomas, too, remained changed. He didn't defend them anymore, though he didn't defend me either. He withdrew into silence, his absence from my parents' side louder than any declaration. In his quiet, I saw the possibility that he was beginning his own reckoning. Maybe someday he would admit what had been done to him, maybe not. But that was his path to walk, not mine. I no longer sought their apologies. I no longer needed their approval. I had carried their poison in my chest for decades, mistaking it for love. Now, standing free of it, I breathed differently. Every step away from their house, their stories, their rules, felt like a step into sunlight after years in a cellar. And yet, the question lingered, whispering late at night. Now that justice had come, could I forgive? I turned it over again and again. Forgiveness had been demanded of me since childhood, forced like a leash. But this was different. This was my choice. And I chose not vengeance, not reconciliation, but release. I would not carry them inside me anymore. Forgiving or not forgiving wasn't the point. Freedom was. I built something new. It wasn't grand or flashy, but it was mine. I found friends who valued me for who I was, who celebrated small victories without comparison. I pursued work that mattered to me, not to prove my worth, but to enjoy the weight of my own voice finally heard. Most importantly, I nurtured the bond with Lily. She spent weekends at my small apartment, coloring on the kitchen floor, filling the space with laughter. She was different after that night, too. She asked fewer questions with fear and more with curiosity, as if she had realized that truth was not a monster to be avoided, but a torch to be carried. I watched her grow, her confidence blooming, her sense of justice sharp. She no longer looked at me as the invisible ant in the corner. She looked at me as someone who had survived, someone who had chosen a different path, and in her eyes, I saw hope. Years passed, but the memory of that Thanksgiving never softened. Instead, it sharpened, like a point on a map marking where the journey began. Every year, as autumn leaves painted the streets, I thought of it, the night my niece ruined dinner, and in doing so, saved us both. The twist of it all still struck me with awe. What had felt like disaster at the time, the spilled gravy, the accusations, the fury, was not destruction. It was rebirth. That night, the golden cage cracked open, and though it cut us as it shattered, it freed us as well. I often wonder what might have happened if Lily had stayed silent, if she hadn't spoken truth with the boldness only a child could possess. Would I still be sitting at that table, shrinking under their shadows, convincing myself that silence was safer than truth? I don't know. What I do know is that she gave me the courage to rise. Now, when I look at Lily, no longer 7, but a young woman carving her own path, I feel a pride so fierce it catches in my throat. She has become everything I once feared I could never be. Brave, honest, unwilling to accept less than what she deserves. She carries no shame for seeing what is broken and naming it aloud. And I, too, have changed. I am no longer the scapegoat, no longer the silent daughter. I am something freer, truer, reborn from fire. The family that once caged me remains scattered, each locked in the prisons of their own making. But I am not there with them. I walked out. I stayed out. That Thanksgiving was supposed to be my undoing. Instead, it became the moment I rose, and in that rise, Lily rose with me. It was never a ruin. It was the beginning of our resurrection.